Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Scotland and we're going to return to a brewery that has now featured on the channel a good number of times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the last couple of years, a good few different styles, but I would say this brewery are best known for their New England Hazy, whatever you want to call them, IPAs. They're still a relatively new addition to the Scottish beer scene, but they are one of the most highly regarded breweries in the country these days. So it's always nice to try some of their new beers when I get back to the motherland of Scotland. The one that we're going to have a look at today is a new release and I'm very much looking forward to it. So hopefully it's another good beer, hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head through to Glasgow once again, Yoker to be precise, and we're going to have a look at another beer from Overtone Brewing Company. So this particular beer is called Out of the Wild. It comes in at 8% ABV and it's another New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. So yeah, like I said, very curious to see what this one has in store for us, and I have heard that this one is pretty good, but I've never been disappointed with an IPA that's come out of Overtone Brewing so far actually. I do wish they would do a few more West Coasters and some black IPAs though. I would love to see them bring those out a little bit more regularly again. In fact, the first beer that I tried from these guys was a Rwandan coffee IPA and it was absolutely beautiful actually. So yeah, would be cool to see a few more different kinds of IPA from Overtone over the next little while. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. But let's crack on with this one then and see how we go. So, as always with my reviews, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Overtone Brewing Company before, and you will no doubt see more added to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel, of course, has a geography-based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Scottish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's being added to very regularly at the moment because I am enjoying a little bit of time at home in the motherland of Scotland. And as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, on to my brewery notes once again then to tell you a little bit about Overtone Brewing. So, as I've mentioned to you already, Overtone Brewing are based through in Glasgow, and the company was founded back in 2017 by Bo Wang, who is originally from Beijing in China. So he had been a home brewer for a number of years before he founded the brewery officially, and the name Overtone comes from Bo Wang's love of techno music, and that's also the reason why you get these lovely techno style artworks on these cans. Actually, I have to say I always enjoy the artwork that you get from Overtone Brewing Company. It's just, you know, spot on actually. I'm a bit artistically illiterate in that sense, but I have to say I do like designs like this that you find on the Overtone cans and labels. But yeah, in the early days, Boway hired Dan Miller, who's from New Hampshire in New England in the northeast of the US, to come in as his head brewer, and he'd previously worked as a head chef but also as a brewer in England, New York, and also in Scotland for 6 Degrees North, who are a very nice Belgian style brewery that I recommend you check out if you get the chance. But also involved at the brewery is Martin Conahan, who worked in the craft beer scene down in New Zealand for a good number of years. He takes part in the brewing, of course, and does various other things around the brewery itself as well. So yeah, these two guys really know what they're doing, which you can see if you actually try some of their beers. But the brewery itself can be found in the New Albion Industrial Estate in Yoker, which is near Renfrew and Clydebank, and they began operations back in 2018. So the brewery don't have a fixed range of beer as such, and they're always brewing different beers, but ones that do prove to be popular do get brought back fairly regularly. Actually, there's a few of them, such as Ouija and Oft, that I really want to have a little look at. So I just need to wait for those to be rebrewed. But as of November 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, these guys have produced a little bit over 50 different kinds of beer, and they do tend to release 1 or 2 new beers every week. And some of those new beers, of course, I should point out, are rebrews, but they are a very prolific brewery. As I mentioned earlier, they are known mainly for their New England Hazy IPAs. They are doing a few more kind of sour beers recently. I've had Imperial Stouts from them. They're doing a little bit of barrel aging these days as well. I've had a lager from them. I think I've seen Hefeweizens as well. And yeah, they've done a few West Coast IPAs and things like that too. So yeah, they are experimenting a little bit with different styles, but I would say their main focus is the New England hazy IPA category actually. But yeah, very, very solid brewery. One of the most highly regarded breweries in Scotland these days, and definitely worth trying if you get the chance to have a look at some of their beers. So yeah, that's all I can really say about Overtone Brewing Company just now. I think the word really spread about this brewery though when they started to put their beers down to England as well, because they were very well thought of in Scotland before they've really kind of jumped on the hype train, if you like, over the last little while. But yeah, check these guys out if you get the chance. If you want to learn more about this brewery, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all those different beers that they've done. But yeah, that's everything for your history section for the moment. Let's have a little look at this can before we open up. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is in a way similar to what we've seen from Overtone before. There you can see on the side, oh, I think I've got that the wrong way around. There you go. Overtone Brewing Company, Out of the Wild, 8% ABV. This one, as we mentioned earlier, New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA. Plain silver cap on this one, of course, because the back of the can is silver. This is one of these ones that the camera is going to hate. But it tells you a little bit about the beer on the back here. In this special double IPA, we've used Neo-Mexicanus hops, Sabro and Talus, which are bred from New Mexican wild hops. These distinctive hops impart creamy coconut and citrus rind flavours, along with stone fruit from the addition of Mosaic, Incognito and Cryo. So yeah, Incognito hops are quite interesting. I need to get properly versed in exactly what they are, but I think it's a sort of hop oil that they add early on during the wort boil, in fact. But the hops in this beer, of course, are Sabro, Talus, Mosaic. All three of these are American hops. I believe Sabro and Mosaic come in around 14% alpha acid. I think Talus can be a little bit higher, towards sort of 16% alpha acid, but Sabro will give you some lovely coconutty notes, and it's got quite a distinctive orangey character. Mosaic, of course, has a very bright kind of zesty tangerine orange. It can also give you some pineapple notes from memory as well, and Talus has this very kind of sharp sort of pink grapefruity character, but it also gives you a wee bit of a kind of it's got a really distinctive floral character to it as well. Actually, it's almost a little bit kind of spicy in its floral notes from what I remember. But yeah, three very interesting hops in this one. As we said, an 8% New England Imperial Hazy Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, and it looks absolutely fabulous. I actually bought this beer at the Caledonian Craft Beer Merchant, which is a new beer shop through in Dunfermline, and I believe this one cost me £6.50, if memory serves me correctly. So that will translate to roughly, that's going to be somewhere in the region of about €8, so about 80 Swedish kroner. And I guess for an American dollars, that's going to be somewhere like $9.50. So yes, craft beer in Scotland is a little bit pricier than it is over in Sweden, in fact, because, you know, it's the private market here rather than Systembolaget. But yeah, let's crack this guy out, and crack this guy open, I should say, and we'll get on with the tasting. The Out of the Wild, 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA, with Mosaic, Talus and Sabro. So yeah, there we go. Hard to believe it's the first time that they're using either Sabro or Talus in one of their beers. I would have thought they would have been all over that a little while ago, but that might well be Strata that I was thinking of. Talus and Strata have really come on the scene at a similar time, actually. So that's worth noting. Those are the two kind of big hops. Strata's going to give you that lovely kind of strawberry note, whereas Talus is going to give you a very bright pink grapefruit. I think we've got most of the beer. There's only a little bit left. We'll just put the rest of it in now. But yeah, it certainly does look very, very nice. There we go. All of it's in the glass. So before the head disappears on this one, you can see that this beer has poured with a lovely, I would say, half finger of a frothy, kind of cream coloured head. That is fading away to be a very thin foamy layer, but you can see the bubbles on this one. Just look at those bubbles there, if the camera's going to focus. Yeah, there you can see, just look at the consistency of those bubbles. Lovely and very, very thick, of course. But yeah, certainly looks the part. That is just fading away to be a very nice kind of thin foamy layer, but leaving that ring around the edge of the glass. But definitely more of a kind of creamy colour rather than being perfectly white. In terms of the colour of the beer itself, if we shine the light through this one, this is actually quite a dark and almost slightly murky yellow. It's starting to lean towards the amber side of things, actually. So I always like comparing these New England IPAs to different kinds of fruit juice, and I would compare this to something like, just a mixed tropical fruit juice, to be honest with you, rather than being, like a mango juice when it would be brighter yellow, or pineapple or something. This one's definitely got a little bit of a more mixed tropical fruit juice vibe to it. But remember, the colour of your beer depends on, 1, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. 2, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar caramelizes, and thus you're going to get a darker colour of beer. A New England IPA of pretty much any description, I believe, undergoes a wort boil of about 70 to 90 minutes, and when it's got a colour like this, I would say that it's most likely this does have some sort of brown sugary leaning malt in it, in fact. And it does say that this one has oats and wheat and barley malt in it, this one, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of slightly brown sugary leaning barley malt in this beer. But yeah, any barrel aging that you do, of course, and any adjuncts that you put in can affect the colour of your beer, but when it comes to this style, we don't really need to care about that. You can see this beer is pretty damn opaque, and when it's an 8% New England double IPA, you wouldn't really expect any less, to be honest with you. But there's 1 or 2 big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass there, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there, but yeah, not so much carbonation visible to this in this one. But yeah, the level of haze, of course, remember, is dependent on the oat content, the wheat content, and the yeast, and that can vary from brewery to brewery, and even beer to beer, and just recipe to recipe, and so on, actually. So yeah, no real rule about that. But for an 8% New England double IPA, the level of haze in this one is leaning towards that soupy and gloopy end of the spectrum. But let's have a closer look at the aroma for this beer, of this beer, I should say. English is terrible today, and we'll see how we get on, but certainly looks the part. Yeah, aroma wise, this is pretty damn solid, and you can tell it's I think this is going to be a big, beastie, kind of creamy one. So I'm going to say straight away, the aroma of this beer, just as a, generally speaking, this one is leaning towards that smooth, oaty, creamy end of the New England spectrum for me. In my opinion, there are 6 different directions for a New England IPA, as I've explained before. They can be more kind of yeasty and farmhousey. They can be a little bit rye leaning and grainy. They can be wheaty and bitey, oaty and creamy, barley malt leaning and bready, or they can be a little bit more sweet and brown sugary leaning. And quite often these beers will display a few of those characteristics. But most of the ones that we get in Scotland, I think, tend to be wheaty and bitey or oaty and creamy with a good bit of barley malt and sometimes some sweetness in them. You don't get so many of the kind of rye leaning and farmhousey ones in Scotland, in my experience. So yeah, that's worth noting, actually. But yeah, aroma wise, it really comes across in the malt base as being very smooth and creamy. The green component is actually quite bright in this one, which I most likely think is down to talus. And then the fruity side of it is very nice and kind of oily and juicy. But let's break that down even further and give you a bit more detail before we actually taste the beer. So the malty backbone, you can definitely get a little bit of bread crust out of this one, but I would say that takes a bit of a back seat. There's a lot of white bread, a lot of that barley malt white bread coming out of this beer for me. You can really smell that, and the wheat is going a long way to just thickening up that big white bready backbone that the beer has. The bread actually smells very, very dense in this one for me, but at the back of the nose you can certainly get a little bit of that sort of wheaty bitiness out of the beer. So yeah, a little bit of bread crust, but a lot of kind of big, dense, but fresh, fluffy white bread in there. The oats, though, are doing a lot to kind of thicken out and kind of cream up this beer as well. So there's a lovely big, just oaty, creamy. There is just a nice big kind of oaty and creamy type vibe to the beer. But yeah, I think it's quite interesting because this one, it has a little bit of sweetness. Mixing in with the oats, you do get a little bit of that kind of Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy sweetness out of this, but not overly much. The oats really come across as big, smooth and creamy rather than having that little bit of a sweeter edge to them, which is kind of interesting. And I will say that the beer smells very fresh. Usually looking at the way the oats come out in a New England IPA is a good measure of how fresh a beer actually is. But this one does smell big and thick and creamy. The oats tend to be a little bit kind of drier and things. The older these New England IPAs get, it's usually a good tell for the age of them. But the more that I smell of this beer, right enough, the slightly sweeter it becomes. So yeah, aroma wise, this is this is a really quite nice beer from the malty side of things. On the hoppy side as well, there's quite a little bit going on. So for me, there's a little bit of earthiness in there, which I think is most likely to come from the Mosaic. I've always found that Mosaic has a little bit of that kind of earthy edge to it, but there's a very nice, bright, floral, aromatic quality to this one. I wouldn't say that it's, you know, got a lot of kind of piney resinous characters or anything like that. It's not got that kind of deeper floral aromaticity or piney resinous character, but for me, it's actually quite bright. I have seen sage used as a descriptor for Talus, and to be honest with you, I wouldn't say that that's too far away. This beer really does have that slightly, you know, that spicy floral aromaticity to it. Not spicy in the same way that pine needles can be, but it's definitely got a little bit of that almost herbally thing about its floral aromaticity, and it's very, very bright as well. So yeah, the floral aromatic qualities in the green side of this beer are very, very nice, I have to say. But the grassy side of it, I think, when it comes to the green component, for me, I think it's the grassy side of the beer that has the most pungency, and it's got a lovely big zestiness that sits on at the front of the nose too. So green component for me is very, very nice. But the fruity side of this beer, I think, is pretty nice as well. So for me, this one, the fruity side of it really leans toward the oily side of things rather than being softer and juicy. But it's got a lovely big oily tangerine orangey character for me, and that's going to be the Sabro and the Mosaic that are doing that. They're the ones that are going to give you the big orangey character. You do get the impression of a little bit of a kind of more tropical fruit underneath, you know, maybe a bit of apricot, a bit of an oily mango, something like this, maybe even a little bit of a juicy pineapple. There is a tropical fruit backbone in there, but I think it's the orangey characteristics that are just a little bit more pungent and stick out a wee bit more in this one. I'm just trying to see, because Talus, as I've told you before, often gives you this big pungent pink grapefruity note, and I do get a little bit of that. You can really smell on the top of the nose just a wee bit of that pink grapefruit, but I don't find Talus as pungent and forthright in this beer as I have in other ones that I've had before. You do get a little bit of the coconut. I mean, you can smell, the more that you focus on the fruity side of the beer, the more it kind of sweetens up, and you just get a little bit of that. You can smell the coconutty kind of characteristics of Talus and Sabro coming out of this one. If I remember rightly, Talus was actually derived from Sabro. But yeah, it's really interesting for sure. But I didn't realise that those two hops were, you know, derived from wild Mexican hops. That's pretty cool as well. So yeah, this is a lovely, lovely smelling beer. This one, big, oily and fruity, oaty and creamy, and it's got a really interesting, very bright floral aromaticity to it. So yeah, take a bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer, as I always say. But let's crack into this one then and see how we go. This is Out of the Wild, an 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Overtone Brewing Company through in Glasgow. Let's get stuck in. Slàinte, skål, cheers. Oh, that's very, very good. I'm going to say straight away, thumbs up to Overtone for this one. First impression of this beer is that this is one of the kind of silkier and smoother New England IPAs that I've had from them in a wee while, actually. But that is very, very nicely done. I can see why this one did get the rating it did. I think it was 4.2 that it had when I had a little look on Untappd earlier on. So it is quite highly rated, but I love them. I'm just going to say straight away, I love the mouthfeel of this one. I love these New England IPAs that are very, they have that balance between being smooth and creamy, but also quite oily. And this one, I think, is just right up my street. You get beers like this every so often that are just, you know, that just tick all the boxes for you. And remember, craft beer and beer in general is, you know, subjective. Different people like different things. So your opinion of this one might be a bit different from mine. But yeah, that's it. But this is very, very good once again. I wouldn't expect anything less from Overtone these days, to be quite honest with you. This is really good. So, yeah. Where do we start with this one? Yeah, I'm going to say flavour profile wise, there's nothing really unexpected about this beer. It is just really well crafted. So straight away across the middle and the back third of your palate, you do get a bit more of that kind of grainy bread crust in there. And I would say that the beer actually has a little bit more graininess to it than the aroma would originally have you believe. And that's, again, a really interesting point about this one, and I can appreciate that for sure. So yeah, on top of that little bit of a bread crusty layer, you can certainly feel, you know, you definitely get more of the kind of breadiness in the beer, and it's interesting because it's a wee bit more separated than you actually might have thought from the aroma as well. So let's just focus on that middle third of your palate then. So you've got that backbone of bread crust, and that becomes a little bit more grainy the further you go into the aftertaste. But on top of that, you can taste the softer breadiness from the barley malt. And as I say, it's not quite as it's not just quite as uniform as the aroma would have you believe, because sitting on top of that you can detect the wheaty layer. And it's interesting because the bitiness of the wheat, this beer does actually have a good little bit of a bitey wheaty character to it that comes out further into the aftertaste, but you can feel that. You've got the bread crust, the barley malt white bread, and then you've got the wheat sitting on top of that, and the whole wheaty part of this beer is actually quite bitey for me, which is really interesting. But yeah, it does, the wheat is definitely thickening up the beer a little bit in this one. But in the middle third of your palate, on top of that, down the middle line of your tongue, you've got that kind of trench, if you like, that's like this, and the oaty parts of the beer really just lie in that. And you can feel that it's actually a big, thick, kind of creamy oaty character in there, and it just, as it spreads out towards the edges of the palate there, it does develop a little bit more smoothness and a slight sweetness to it as well, which is kind of interesting. Now, when it comes to the sweeter side of the malt base in this one, there is a little bit of a circle in the very middle of your palate here, which shows you some, it gives you a little bit more of a kind of brown sugary, you know, a little bit of that kind of brown sugary Werther's Original type thing. You do get a little bit of that in this beer for sure. Yeah, there's definitely a wee bit of that kind of brown sugary Werther's Original sort of thing, and that, I think, it's interesting because that comes out a wee bit more the more that you drink of this beer for sure. So yeah, you get that nice kind of Werther's, a little circle in the middle of your palate with that Werther's Original butter candy, butterscotchy type thing, and the sweetness actually does intensify a little bit the further into the centre of your palate that you go. But this beer, really, the more that you drink of it, I think it does develop a wee bit of sweetness, but you still have that kind of old school sort of 2015, 2016 era bready, wheaty type character about this beer. So it is a wee bit of a kind of more old school type New England IPA, this, in some respects, but as I said, it's really solid. I don't think there's anything else that we need to say about the middle third of your palate, so let's focus on the other things in beer. So the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up there. You can feel the kind of graininess of the bread and the bread crust in there. Then into that back third of the palate, you've got a very nice little bit of bread crust underneath. You can feel the white bread in there as well, and it does feel a bit thicker on that back third of your palate. Then on top of that, you get the bitier wheat, and you can really feel the bitiness of the wheat on the back third of your palate, and a bit more of the grainy character of the bread. But on top of the I would say on top of the wheaty layer of this one, you can feel the yeasty character. And for me, the yeasty character in this is actually quite condensed, actually. So you can feel that sort of doughy, bready ball kind of thing that sits on top of there. And there is just a wee touch of a kind of grainy, spicy character to it. But yeah, the yeasty notes in this one, for me, are not as pronounced as I've had in some of the other overtones that I remember. So that's quite interesting. But I have to remember that the last overtone I had was the Bruce, which was a paleo basically, or a session IPA. So that's also something I need to bear in mind with it too. You know, these double IPAs, of course, have got bigger malt bases and things. But yeah, as you come back from the back of your palate, you can feel the flavour is like this. It's a little bit taller, but then as you come further forward, it just condenses down a wee bit, and those flavours are even more kind of squashed together. But the malty, yeasty side of this beer, I think, is really nicely done. So a thumbs up to Overtone Brewing for this. I think this beer is really nicely done. But yeah, green component is also really nice. This beer for me, as I've said, it's just this big oily New England IPA, and it just ticks a lot of boxes for me. It's very good, but let's focus on the green component of the beer then. So back corners of the palate, you've got a nice little bit of earthiness there. As you move further forward, it does develop a wee bit of a herbal quality. Like I said earlier, the earthy characteristics in this beer, I suspect, come from Mosaic. But then as you push towards the kind of front corners of the palate, you've got that nice floral aromatic sort of thing coming out of this one. And like I say, it's quite a bright floral aromaticity, but it does have that wee bit of kind of a herbally spice to it, which is kind of interesting. You know, saying that that Talus has a bit of sage to it, I don't think is too inaccurate, to be honest with you, because you really do get some of that in this beer. But then round the front curve of the palate, it's a little bit lighter and grassy, and it's got quite a distinctive zestiness to the grassy component of the beer. Now you need to remember with New England IPAs that these tend to rely on late addition and dry hops rather than early addition hops, but that I believe is what the Incognito is being used for in this one, is to kind of, you know, put some hop oils in there in the early part of the wort boil, and just, you know, bring out more kind of green flavours, if that makes sense. But yeah, remember, when it comes to your wort boil, the earlier you add the hops, the more bitterness they contribute. West Coast IPAs tend to have a lot of early addition hops as well as the late addition and the dry hopping. Late addition hops give you a little bit of bitterness. They're usually done within the last half hour of the wort boil. Then the dry hopping is the one that gives you that just gives you simply flavour and aroma, in fact. But yeah, I think this one is mainly late addition and dry hopping once again, but the Incognito hop oils are doing something interesting with this, bringing out a bigger, more kind of resonating green component, which I do like about this. But yeah, on the fruity side of things then, I think we've said everything we need to about the green component. Let's focus on that front third of your palate. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, again, you get a little bit of a bready build up in there and a wee bit more bread crust. Then the base of that front third of your palate is a soft white bready character with the kind of bread crusty notes underneath, and on top of that you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So for me, at the back of the front third of your palate, I think it's Talus that's really kind of showing its head. Yeah, you've got that lovely kind of bright pink grapefruity note there at the back of that front third of your palate, which I really like. But on top of that, you've got a nice, or coming further forward from that, you do get a little bit of a kind of, I want to say it's almost like a kind of peachy sharpness. There is almost a little bit of peachy character to this beer, but underneath you can feel a little bit more of a kind of dry apricot-y mango type flavour. But yeah, for me, the back half of the front third of your palate is all about that pink grapefruit from the Talus. But then as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, this is where the orangey and tangerine characteristics of the Mosaic and the Sabro really start to show. So the base of the front third of your palate, you can definitely get a wee bit of that coconutty character from the Sabro coming out of this one. But then on top, yeah, you've got that lovely soft tangerine mandarin-y orange coming out of this one. So yeah, it does go together really quite nicely, and you maybe get a little bit of, you know, pineapple or something on that kind of border region between front half and back half of the middle of the front third of your palate, if that makes sense. So yeah, a lot of pink grapefruit, a lot of kind of soft tangerine orange, and a few, you know, mangoey, apricot-y and pineapple notes in there as little subtleties for me. But this is a lovely New England double IPA, but we wouldn't expect anything less of Overtone, to be quite honest with you. This is awesome stuff from them once again. So you can see why people are raving about their beers. Actually, just a little bit hard to believe that this is the first time they've used Talus actually, but like I said earlier, I might be mixing up Talus with Strata, which I'm sure they've used a couple of times. But let's round off the review with a little look at the mouthfeel then. So this beer for me is kind of bottom end of full-bodied, top end of mid-bodied. I think that's probably fair. The carbonation in this one is almost kind of non-existent actually. It really smoothens out the beer, and this is a big kind of quite slick and oily but still quite creamy New England IPA for me. It's really got a very nice mouthfeel that strikes a chord with me. In terms of the IBUs of this one, then I wouldn't be surprised if this beer has a little bit more bitterness to it, because there is something kind of resonating with this. I wouldn't be surprised if this is 40 or maybe 50 IBUs. The standard for a New England IPA, of course, tends to be 30, but as you go to a double IPA, sometimes they pump it up to 40. If you go to a triple, sometimes they do it to 50. This one just feels a little bit more kind of bitter to me, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 40, maybe 50 IBU beer. I don't know if it says on the can. No, it doesn't. But yeah, still a very, very nice, a very nice level of bitterness for it. And I do like my double IPAs to be a wee bit more bitter, because it just lets you know, this is a double IPA, and this one certainly does that. The malt base, as I've said, is very, very smooth. There is a slight degree of sweetness to it, but quite a bit of creaminess as well. It is a little bit more like a kind of 2015, 2016 more bready type IPA, this one. And like I said earlier, it's got quite a lot of wheatiness and creamy oaty character to it when we're talking about this as a style. It's not one of the sweeter ones that you're going to come across, but the fruity character in this one I think is lovely and oily, and I think that also suits this beer very, very well. So yeah, I've really, really enjoyed this one, but it's very rare that you get a beer from Overtone that you don't enjoy. We should say that. So yeah, I think we can round off this review there. This one was the Out of the Wild, a New England Hazy Imperial Double, whatever you want to call it, IPA from Overtone Brewing Company in Yoker through in Glasgow. So yeah, let's leave it there. Once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Overtone Brewing Company, and we will be returning to these guys pretty soon. I do have a couple of other beers from them sitting in the fridge that we'll review over the next little while. But thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out theirs, and I'll catch you guys again very soon. Out of the Wild, 8% New England Hazy Imperial Double IPA, New England IPA from Overtone Brewing Company through in Glasgow. Slàinte, skål, cheers, and see you on the next one.